Loop Hero is certainly a game that defies definition. It's a little bit idle game, a little bit city builder, and a plethora of other mechanics and designs. Usually when a game tries to do too many things, it tends to fall flat on its face with a message from armchair designers telling them to exercise more restraint. But in Loop Hero, it somehow works well enough to be a compelling and engaging experience, with a few caveats. Loop Hero is a game where you play a nameless hero in a world that's been completely destroyed and now exists in a void. It's up to you to rebuild this world by fighting monsters and placing down resource tiles and building up a little town in between rounds. Combat is automatic, but you do have some control over the results by equipping your hero, by putting down resource tiles to change their stats, and building up a simple town between runs to affect the way combat works. It's up to you to rebuild this world however you see fit, even though it disappears between every run. Well, regardless, the narrative of Loop Hero may not seem particularly interesting or unique. And it's really not bad per se. In fact, there's actually a lot of the dialogue that I really enjoyed. Like, a lot. Most games fail to grapple with any real morality questions. They simply give you a choice equivalent to either saving a bus full of orphans or performing a live vivisection on a puppy. There's not exactly a lot of minute discussion about morals and ethics. But while there's not any real moral choices in the game, there are some really interesting philosophical questions being bantered about. Things like grappling with the ethics of rebuilding the entire world as it was, or just the parts that you like and agree with. But outside of these very pleasant dialogue surprises, the overall story is pretty bland and threadbare. The town's denizens, while interesting on the surface, are barely present and add almost nothing to the overall narrative. Most of the game's story unfolds between your character and the bosses of each chapter, and after you've encountered these a handful of times, their dialogue quickly starts repeating. In full disclosure, however, I actually wasn't able to completely finish the story of the game. This wasn't due to lack of interest or trying, but rather the overall progression of the game really starts to stall out towards the last few chapters. While the town does offer some boons to help you on your runs, these gains are so minuscule that it's nearly impossible to make any real progress. You'll find yourself making run after run after run in the hopes of getting even just a tiny little edge to help you on your next one. And when I say tiny, I mean very tiny. As in being awarded an item that will grant you a 1% damage bonus to a single enemy type. The game is downright miserly when handing out improvements to the player's power, and you'll be stuck grinding for quite a while to make any real headway. But this honestly could be due to me missing something obvious about the game's mechanics. While there are certainly many things I could suggest improvements on, likely the biggest would be the game's poor communication. For example, there are terms that sound incredibly similar and are not explained anywhere, like how the game uses both the terms critical chance and critical bonus. Or when you're playing the Necromancer, how it uses the terms skeleton quality and skeleton level as two different stats. And keep in mind that none of these terms are explained anywhere in the game, not even in the seemingly all-encompassing menu labeled Encyclopedia. And there's plenty of other examples as well, like how it's often difficult to discern exactly how to get a resource you'll need to complete a construction of a town building. Interfaces not being labeled clearly, or like how the game uses a ton of different sound effects in an attempt to try and communicate. I mean, like, a lot of sound effects. There's times it honestly evoked memories of standing in the middle of a 90s era arcade. There's a whole lot of noise coming from a whole lot of different directions, and none of it's super understandable above the cacophony. Visually, the game is a very mixed bag. The large portraits and some of the in-game sprites are kinda nice to look at, but I'd say about 80% of the game's visuals are about a C-. It's passing, but just barely. But again, those character portraits are actually pretty nice to look at. The music and sound effects are passable. They're chiptune inspired and have all the bleeps and bloops you'd expect of a game of this graphical fidelity. But it would have been nice to have a few more tracks, as the ones that are included tend to wear out their welcome, especially after you start spinning your wheels after hitting that massive progression roadblock. In Loop Hero, you'll be spending a lot of time slapping down resource tiles that will affect the stats of either the player or the enemies. These range from increasing your attack speed to decreasing the maximum health of all creatures on the map. And when you're placing down tiles in a run, you'll likely quickly find what's called the mountaintop. When you've slapped down rocks in a 3x3 grid and it transforms into a dope-ass mountain, it's a really neat moment. And since you're likely to encounter this in the first few hours of the game, you might be thinking all about all the other cool tile combos there must be. You'll want to temper that excitement. Sadly, you really shouldn't expect much more than this as far as large, unique structures go. While there are certainly some interesting tile combinations you can pull off to get your hero stats just the way you like, most of them pale in comparison to the thoughts that danced in your head when you first put that mountaintop together. While we're on the topic of resource tiles, it's important to note that nearly every move you make in the game will improve your stats, but will almost always come with a trade-off. There's very few aspects of the game that come with just all benefits. Even building the awesome mountaintop comes with a drawback, as it starts spawning a fairly strong enemy on the map at regular intervals, which some could argue is a good thing depending on the run you're trying to make. While I can certainly see the value of presenting the player with a dilemma to test their strategies, it can quickly become frustrating and deflating to know that almost every single move you make creates more problems for you to counteract down the road. In fact, there starts to be so many rules about tile positioning that it can become very frustrating and confusing. Like when you're looking for one particular resource that you need to build something back in town. You'll need to have a bookery, but ensuring that all of its charges have been depleted, and it needs to be within range of a special beacon, and it can't be in range of a vampire castle. It all starts to feel like a version of that weird colored tile puzzle from Undertale. You know, the one that's intentionally ridiculous to where they didn't even make you play it? I guess the Loop Hero devs aren't Toby Fox fans? Look, I know that's an awful lot of complaining. And trust me, I've always got more in the tank. But that's why you come here, right? To know what the irritation points of a game are so you don't waste your time with games that you don't like? Hopefully that's not the case with Loop Hero. Hopefully I've managed not to deter you and that you'll give it a shot. There's a lot of fun to be found in the game. I honestly do recommend people take a peek if they find themselves in the market for something unique and fun. It's currently on Game Pass for subscribers of that service, but only on the cloud and console. Sorry, PC purists. With such a unique premise and solid, albeit sparse, dialogue, Loop Hero will honestly have you telling yourself one more run well into the wee hours of the night. At least until you hit that massive progression wall. For me at least, that is when I decided to exit the loop. I couldn't see myself putting in another 5 hours of spinning my wheels just to beat the final boss. But with this many hours previously invested, I'd be remiss if I didn't give Loop Hero at least a tepid recommendation. Play it if you're looking for something to tide you over to the next big release, or just looking for one of those weekend palate cleanser games. You could certainly do a lot worse. But, as always, don't listen to me. Make sure you pick up the game for yourself and form your own opinion. Hopefully you'll like it.